When Prince Edward of Nordmark saw the Valhalla ship burning on the black rocks, he expected to find gold and slaves, not the fierce sea-maiden who would steal his very soul. But sometimes the fiercest storms reveal the most precious treasures hidden beneath the waves. The storm had been merciless, like Thor's rage unleashed upon the mortal realm. Prince Edward gripped his sword as his longship cut through churning black waters, approaching the wreckage scattered across the jagged coastline. The Valhalla vessel lay shattered against razor-sharp rocks, its proud dragon head split in two. "Search for survivors," Edward commanded his warriors, his breath forming clouds in the bitter cold. As son of King Magnus, the Iron Wolf, he had raided these waters countless times, but something felt different about this wreck, something that made his warrior's instincts prickle. The wind howled across the desolate shore, carrying the acrid smell of burning wood. Broken masts jutted from the surf like ribs of some great sea beast, while torn sails fluttered like funeral shrouds. Edward's men spread across the rocky beach, searching for anything of value among the debris. That's when he heard it, a defiant voice cutting through the wind like a blade. "If you've come to finish what the storm started, get it over with." Edward turned and froze. There, standing knee-deep in icy surf with waves crashing around her, was the most magnificent woman he had ever seen. Her long auburn hair whipped around her face like flames, and her emerald eyes blazed with fury that could melt ice. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, but she stood tall, despite her wounds, a broken oar gripped like a weapon. She was breathtaking in her defiance, like a Valkyrie descended from Valhalla. Her torn leather jerkin revealed glimpses of smooth skin marked with blue tattoos, sacred symbols of her clan. Silver arm rings caught the grey light, and a serpent pendant hung from her neck. "I am Ella of the Valhalla clan," she declared, voice steady despite obvious pain. "Daughter of Chief Bjorn the Sea Serpent, kill me if you must, but I'll not beg for mercy from Nordmark dogs." Edward's warriors moved to surround her, but he raised his hand to stop them. Something about her courage, her absolute refusal to bow before death, stirred something deep within his chest, something he'd never experienced in 25 years of war and conquest. "Lower your weapon, sea-maiden," Edward said, stepping closer to the water's edge. "I mean you no harm." Ella laughed bitterly, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "No harm? Your people have been our enemies for generations. Your father's ships have burned our villages, stolen our grain stores, left our children starving through winter's bite." "And your father's warriors have done the same to ours," Edward replied, but his voice held no anger. "Yet here we stand, both survivors of the storm's fury, both breathing when we could be feeding the fishes." He noticed how she shivered in the freezing water, her lips turning blue, despite her defiant stance. The North Sea was merciless. It could kill a strong warrior in minutes. Without hesitation, Edward unfastened his thick fur cloak, the one his mother had gifted him before her death, and waded into the surf toward her. "Stay back!" Ella raised the broken oar with trembling hands, but the cold was sapping her strength. Ice crystals formed in her hair, and her breathing came in short, visible puffs. "You'll die of frost before you can swing that," Edward said gently, holding out his cloak like a peace offering. "I give you my word as a prince. No harm will come to you while you're under my protection." For a long moment, their eyes met across the churning water. Green met brown in a clash, more powerful than any sword strike. Something passed between them, a recognition that neither could name, electric as lightning and twice as dangerous. The hatred she'd been taught to feel for Nordmark warriors warred with the kindness she saw in his eyes. Slowly, as if moving through thick honey, Ella lowered her makeshift weapon. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crashing waves. "Why would you help your enemy? Your father would call it weakness." Edward stepped closer, water soaking through his boots, as he wrapped the warm cloak around her shoulders. His hands brushed hers as he secured the fur, and both felt a jolt of something neither had experienced before. Her skin was soft as silk beneath the rough wool, and he caught her unique scent, sea salt and wild roses. "Perhaps," he said softly, his breath warm against her ear, "because some things are more important than old hatreds. Perhaps because when I look at you, I don't see Chief Bjorn's daughter. I see a woman who faced death without flinching. Ella pulled the cloak tighter, feeling warmth return to her numb limbs. And when I look at you, she admitted reluctantly, I don't see the monster from our fireside tales. I see something else entirely. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Behind them, Edward's warriors watched with growing unease. Taking a Valhalla prisoner was one thing, treating her like a guest was quite another. My prince, called Thorvald, his second in command. The tide turns soon. We should return to the ship. Edward nodded, but didn't step away from Ella. Will you come willingly? As my guest, not my captive? Ella studied his face, searching for deception and finding none. Do I have a choice? There's always a choice, Edward replied, even for sea-maidens with fire in their eyes. As Edward's magnificent longship cut through the grey waters toward Nordmark, Ella sat near the dragon-carved bow, wrapped in his fur cloak, but still watchful as a cornered wolf. The other warriors gave her suspicious glances from beneath their iron helms, their hands never straying far from their weapons. She was, after all, the daughter of their greatest enemy. You're either very brave or very foolish, Ella said quietly as Edward approached with a steaming bowl of fish broth, the rich aroma making her stomach clench with hunger. My advisers would unanimously vote for foolish, he admitted, with a wry smile, settling beside her on the wooden bench, taking the daughter of our greatest enemy aboard my ship, treating her as an honored guest rather than a prisoner. Then why did you do it? She accepted the bowl gratefully, wrapping her cold fingers around its warmth. Edward was quiet for a long moment, watching the grey waters roll past like liquid pewter. Seabirds wheeled overhead, their cries mixing with the rhythmic splash of oars and creak of rope. Because when I looked into your eyes back there, I didn't see an enemy plotting my destruction. I saw something else, something that made my heart race like I'd run up a mountain. Ella studied his profile as she sipped the broth, the strong jaw covered in dark beard, the thoughtful brown eyes that seemed to see straight through her defenses, the way his hair caught the wind like a banner. This was not the cruel, bloodthirsty prince she'd been taught to hate since childhood. This was a man who had shown her mercy when he could have taken revenge, kindness when he could have chosen cruelty. What will happen when we reach your land? She asked, dreading the answer. You'll be treated as my personal guest, not my prisoner, Edward promised, his voice firm. But Ella, my father won't understand this decision. He'll see only a Valhalla warrior in his hall, a serpent brought into the wolf's den. And your people will see only weakness in their prince, she replied sadly. A man who let his heart overrule his warrior's judgment. We're both walking into a storm worse than the one that wrecked my ship. Edward turned to face her fully, and she felt her breath catch at the intensity in his gaze. Are you afraid of what awaits us? Ella met his stare steadily, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. I've sailed through hurricanes that could tear islands apart and fought beside seasoned warriors twice my size. I've faced down sea monsters and walked across burning decks. But what I feel when I look at you— She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. That terrifies me more than any battle I've ever fought. The admission hung between them like a confession, dangerous and intoxicating. Edward reached out slowly, as if approaching a wild creature, and brushed a strand of auburn hair from her face. His touch was gentle as falling snow, but it sent fire racing through her veins. I know, he said softly, because I feel it too. This thing between us, it's stronger than clan loyalty, more dangerous than any weapon. Around them, the ship continued its steady progress toward an uncertain future, carrying two hearts that had found each other across a divide that was supposed to be uncrossable. The great hall of Nordmark fell into deathly silence as Edward entered with Ella at his side, their footsteps echoing off the massive stone pillars like drumbeats before battle. King Magnus rose slowly from his carved throne, his weathered face darkening like storm clouds as he recognized the clan markings on her torn clothing and the distinctive serpent pendant at her throat. My son! The king's voice boomed across the vast hall, rich with authority and barely contained rage. Explain why you bring a Valhalla serpent into my home. into the very heart of our kingdom. "She is under my protection, father," Edward replied firmly, his hand moving unconsciously to rest on his sword hilt. "A survivor of the storm, not a threat to our people." "Not a threat?" Magnus descended the stone steps slowly, each footfall deliberate and menacing, his hand resting on his own weapon. "This is Bjorn the Sea Serpent's daughter. Do you forget how many of our brave warriors have fallen to her clan's cursed blades? How many of our wives are widows because of her bloodline?" Ella stepped forward, her chin raised proudly, despite being surrounded by hostile faces and gleaming weapons. "I remember every battle, King Magnus, every life lost on both sides. But I also remember that your son saved my life when he could have left me to die like a dog on those rocks." "Pretty words from a serpent's forked tongue," spat Theron, Edward's cousin and bitter rival for succession, his scarred face twisted with disdain. "Father, she's clearly bewitched our prince with some Valhalla sorcery. Look how he stares at her like a lovesick boy, instead of the warrior we raised him to be." The accusation hung in the air like a blade poised to strike. Edward felt the weight of every eye in the hall upon them. Nobles, warriors, servants all watching to see how their future king would respond. He knew his feelings for Ella were written plainly across his face, but he couldn't deny them, even if it meant losing his throne. "Is this true?" King Magnus demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the hall. "Have you lost your warrior's heart to our greatest enemy? Have you forgotten your duty to your people?" Before Edward could formulate an answer that wouldn't doom them both, the deep blast of a war horn echoed across the fjord, its mournful note chilling every soul in the hall. A messenger burst through the heavy oak doors, still dripping from his desperate ride, his horse's foam speckling his cloak. "My king," the man gasped, falling to one knee before the throne. "Chief Björn's war fleet approaches our shores, 50 ships bearing the Valhalla banner. They come for the girl. They come for blood and vengeance." The hall erupted in shouts and the harsh scrape of steel being drawn from sheaths. Warriors reached for axes and shields, while nobles backed away from the windows. Magnus turned to Ella, his eyes cold as winter ice, calculating and merciless. "It seems your father values you highly, girl. Highly enough to risk open war with Nordmark, highly enough to bring his entire fleet to our doorstep." Ella's face went pale as fresh snow. "He doesn't know I'm alive," she whispered, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. "If he's coming with the full fleet, it's for revenge. He thinks your son murdered me along with my ship and crew." The implications crashed over the assembled crowd like a tide. War was coming to their shores, and the woman they blamed stood right before them. As Nordmark's warriors prepared frantically for the coming battle, sharpening weapons, checking armor, positioning archers along the cliffs, Edward found Ella on the windswept promontory overlooking the fjord. 50 Valhalla longships dotted the dark water like hungry wolves, their dragon prows gleaming blood-red in the fading light, war banners snapping in the harsh wind. "I have to go to him," Ella said without turning around, her voice barely audible over the howling gale. "If my father sees me alive and unharmed, he'll call off the attack. No one has to die for his mistaken revenge." "And if he doesn't believe you chose to stay?" Edward moved to stand beside her, close enough to feel her warmth in the bitter cold. "If he thinks I've made you my thrall through force or dark magic, if he believes I have dishonored you, then both our peoples will bleed for what we feel," she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air, "and their blood will stain our hands forever." Edward took her hand, intertwining their fingers as naturally as breathing. Her skin was soft but marked with the calluses of a true warrior, someone who had earned her place through skill and courage. There has to be another way, some path that doesn't end in slaughter and tears. Ella turned to face him, her emerald eyes bright with unshed tears that caught the last rays of sunlight. "In all the ancient sagas, when a Viking prince falls for his enemy's daughter, how do those tales end? What fate awaits star-crossed lovers like us?" "Usually in tragedy," Edward admitted, his voice heavy with the weight of history. "Blood, betrayal, and broken hearts scattered like leaves before winter storms. But perhaps it's time to write a new kind of saga. Perhaps we can forge a different ending." Before she could respond, Urgent shouts echoed up from the harbour below. Bjorn the sea serpent himself had come ashore under a peace banner, demanding to speak with King Magnus face to face. The two old enemies, who had spent decades trying to kill each other, would meet at dawn to negotiate, or declare total war. "I know my father better than anyone," Ella said urgently, gripping Edward's arm with desperate strength. "He'll demand trial by combat for my supposed murder. He'll want to face your father in single battle to restore his honor and mine. Then I'll fight in my father's place," Edward declared without hesitation. "It's my right as heir and my choice that brought us to this moment." "No!" Ella's voice cracked like a whip. "Bjorn has never lost a duel in 40 years of warfare. He's killed men twice your size, warriors with decades more experience. He'll cut you down, and then our clans will be at war anyway." "What would you have me do?" Edward demanded, pain clear in his voice. "Let innocent warriors die for our forbidden love? Watch good men fall because I couldn't keep my heart in check?" Ella was quiet for a long moment, then slowly reached up and pulled off the silver pendant she wore, the sacred serpent symbol of her clan, passed down through generations of Valhalla women. "There is one way, an old tradition, almost forgotten. If I renounce my birthright publicly and choose exile—" "I won't let you sacrifice everything for me," Edward said fiercely. "Your family, your people, your very identity." "And I won't let you die for loving me," she replied with equal passion. "Tomorrow, when our fathers meet on that field, we'll both make our choice known to both armies, together, as one heart speaking with one voice." Dawn broke grey and cold over the neutral ground between the two armed camps, mist rising from the frost-covered earth like the breath of sleeping giants. King Magnus and Chief Bjorn stood face to face for the first time in 20 blood-soaked years, their mutual hatred as sharp and gleaming as the weapons at their sides. Between them stretched 50 yards of empty ground that might soon be watered with the blood of kings. "You have my daughter," Bjorn growled, his massive frame still intimidating despite his 60th year, war axe resting easily in hands that had ended countless lives. "Return her unharmed, or I'll burn your settlement to ash and scatter your people to the four winds. She was found half dead in the surf and brought here as a guest under my protection," Magnus replied coldly, his own sword gleaming at his hip. "Though I begin to think that was a grave mistake that will cost us all dearly." "Where is she?" Bjorn's scarred hand moved to his weapon's handle, the gesture causing a ripple of tension through both armies. "Let me see with my own eyes that she lives and breathes. Let me hear from her own lips that she has not been defiled." That's when Edward and Ella emerged from the Nordmark camp, walking hand in hand across the field, as if they owned the very ground beneath their feet. The sight sent ripples of shock and disbelief through both assembled armies. Warriors who had expected to see a prisoner exchange instead witnessed something far more dangerous. "Father," Ella called out, her voice carrying clearly across the field, with the authority of a true chieftain's daughter. "I live, and I am here by my own choice. No force or trickery brought me to this place." Bjorn's weathered face contorted with rage and disbelief, the scars from old battles standing out white against his flushed skin. "What sorcery is this? What dark magic has this Nordmark dog worked upon you to steal your senses?" "He saved my life when he could have let me drown," Ella replied, not releasing Edward's hand, despite the hundreds of hostile eyes upon them. "And in doing so, he showed me that our hatred has festered too long, poisoned too many generations." "You've been bewitched, made mad by trauma and Nordmark lies," Bjorn snarled, drawing his massive war axe with a sound like thunder. "I'll kill this prince and free you from whatever spell binds your mind." "No!" Ella stepped between the two men, her arms spread wide as if she could hold back the tide of violence through will alone. "If you want to kill him, you'll have to go through me. You'll have to strike down your own daughter." The armies on both sides stirred restlessly, hands moving to weapons as the confrontation spiraled toward bloodshed. This was not how such meetings were supposed to unfold. Edward stepped forward, his voice ringing with royal authority. "Chief Bjorn, I ask formally for your daughter's hand in marriage, not as conquest or prize, but as a bridge between our peoples. Let love heal what hatred has torn apart." "Never!" Bjorn roared, spittle flying from his lips. I'd rather see her dead and buried than married to Nordmark filth. Better a dead daughter than a traitor to her blood. The cruel words hit Ella like physical blows, but they also freed something in her soul. She straightened to her full height, her voice ringing with newfound resolve that would echo through the sagas for generations. "Then I am no longer your daughter," she declared, pulling off her clan pendant and casting it at his feet like a gauntlet. "I choose love over hatred, peace over endless war, Edward over everything I've ever known." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Bjorn raised his axe with a bellow of pure rage, but Edward was ready, his sword singing from its sheath like a promise of steel and determination. 3 moons later, as the first golden light of dawn painted the tranquil fjord in shades of honey and rose, Ella stood barefoot on the sandy shore of a small island halfway between Nordmark and Valhalla territories. Edward approached from behind, his own feet silent on the smooth stones, and wrapped his strong arms around her waist as she leaned back against his chest with a contentment she had never imagined possible. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her ear, his voice carrying the gentle concern that had first captured her heart. "Leaving everything you knew, everyone who raised you, the very identity you were born to?" Ella sonrió, una expresión de pura alegría que habría robado el aliento de cualquier hombre que la viera, y colocó sus manos sobre las de él, entrelazando sus dedos como las raíces de árboles antiguos. "How can I regret finding my true home in your heart? How can I mourn a past that led me to this perfect moment?" The battle that fateful day had been brief but earth-shaking in its consequences. When Edward had defeated her father in single combat, choosing to spare Bjorn's life rather than take the revenge that honor demanded, something fundamental had shifted in both armies. The sight of mercy where there could have been vengeance, compassion where tradition called for blood, planted a seed of hope that grew into something neither clan had dared imagine. Now their small settlement thrived on this neutral island, like a living symbol of what love could accomplish. Former enemies worked side by side under the same sky, building something entirely new from the ashes of old hatred. Valhalla fishermen taught Nordmark farmers the secret rhythms of the tides and seasons. Nordmark smiths forged new tools for Valhalla shipbuilders, their hammers ringing in harmony across the peaceful harbor. Children who should have grown up learning to hate each other instead played together on the beaches, their laughter carrying on the wind like music from the gods themselves. "The council meets today," Edward murmured against her hair, breathing in the scent of sea salt and wild flowers that always seemed to surround her. "Both our fathers will be there, sitting at the same table, for the first time without weapons drawn. Still stubborn as old bulls, both of them." Ella laughed, the sound like silver bells in the morning air. "But they're talking instead of fighting, planning instead of plotting destruction. That's more progress than anyone dared hope for." "More than something," Edward agreed, turning her gently in his arms so he could look down into those emerald eyes that had first captured his soul in a winter storm. "It's everything we dreamed of and more. You were right that day on the cliff. We did write a new kind of saga." "We're still writing it," she corrected, standing on her toes to brush her lips against his in a kiss as soft as morning mist. "Every day we choose each other over old prejudices. Every day we choose peace over the easy path of war. We add another verse to our story, another chapter to the legend of what love can accomplish." As the sun climbed higher, painting their little paradise in warm golden light that seemed to bless everything it touched, they walked hand in hand toward their new home, a place where Viking hearts could love without borders or boundaries, where the sea wolves had finally found their peace, and where 2 souls had proven that some bonds are stronger than blood, some loves greater than hatred, and some stories worth rewriting no matter the cost.